Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode with the Waiting List podcast. Jacqueline here, joined today by my co-hosts Lang and Daniel. And today we are welcoming Eric Wind onto the Waiting List. How are you doing, Eric?
Great. It's a pleasure to be on here, Jacqueline and Lang and Daniel.
Thank you for coming on. I know it's pretty late where you are right now, so thank you so much for making time for us. We are excited to have you on. And so for those who are listening, I'm sure many of you already know Eric, whether it's through his scholarship contributions on the internet, on Hodinkee, or through his time at Christies auction house, but most likely it's probably through your own Instagram account, Eric, which is at Eric M. Wind. So if you're not following him already, make sure to do that. He posts a lot of sick vintage watches there, including a few of my own, actually, which I've asked Eric to help me sell recently. So thank you for that, Eric.
Thank you.
Yeah, so anyways, but to those who don't know who he is, I guess we can start with a very quick and simple introduction. So just tell us about where you're from, a bit about your upbringing, how your career in watches started, and what you're doing right now.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, was born there, didn't leave until I went to Georgetown University to study international politics, then worked in Washington, D.C. for a few years for a small consulting firm, and then decided to pursue an MBA at Oxford. But during that time, while I was at Georgetown, I came across this small blog that had just started called Hodinkee, kind of in its first month or two of existence. And it was really just one interesting vintage watch posted that was typically available for sale or coming up for auction at a time, and just became addicted to learning about watches and diving down the rabbit hole of forums. And this was the days before Instagram. So you're really just looking at forums and some enthusiast websites and some dealer websites.
Yeah.
Very primitive. And then, and eBay as well. So that was kind of the beginning. And then I began to, buy some things, collect a little bit, start the journey. And then I was writing to Ben Clymer occasionally with interesting watches I saw for sale on eBay that would be good to cover, other dealer sites. And then he said, why don't you start writing? If you want, I'm about to start journalism school at Columbia, so I'll have less free time. So it was unpaid and it just was purely passion. And I enjoyed writing for Hodinkee, pretty regularly, at least weekly, for about 5 years. And then I got recruited from the company I was working for after Oxford, which was a biofuel company, to go work at Christies as vice president, senior specialist of watches. And I did that a couple of years and then realized I kind of had the clients and opportunity to go out on my own. So I started Win Vintage now almost 4 years ago, and it's been, a real blast.
Yeah. See, I didn't even know that you had stumbled upon, you started writing for Hodinkee when it was pretty much like a one-man show, right? Just Ben when you started. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so it was, I never would have thought it would turn into what it did. It was just a pure enthusiasm.
So what was it like at the beginning? Like, what was Hodinkee like at the beginning?
Hodinkee at the beginning was simply one interesting vintage watch posted a day. So I remember, I think it was early 2010, just as an example, Ben wrote about a Seiko rally diver that looked to be in really good condition. That was from a dealer in Canada, watchestobuy.com. His website's basically the same as it was, 11 years ago. And it was like $395. So I decided to buy it. It was like you had to move quickly because things would sell to people. And I bought it. I really liked it. And then that was kind of it from there. Then everyone's kind of looking to see what he's going to post every day, something on eBay, something coming up for auction at Antiquorum or Christie's. They were pretty short articles, I'd say, often in the kind of 300 word range, just short little things with a photo. And it was kind of the beginning. That whole concept sort of turned into Bring a Loop, which is now, doesn't exist. But that my concept with like writing about a bunch of cool watches for sale every Friday.
Right.
Because obviously it kind of transitioned to covering new watches pretty quickly, but still with a heavy vintage focus.
Right.
I have a question, which is, at the start you were looking at all these forums to get your knowledge. What do you think forums still offer to a watch enthusiast looking to gain more knowledge compared to the other channels that they now have?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a slow death for forums for sure. What is, the general concept of Instagram where you have a photo and you might write something about it and people can comment, that's not that different from what forums were, which is, show a watch and maybe talk about it. That's yours. But it's not a place for like a text question. So for instance, hey, I'm thinking about buying this, what should I look for, or something like that. That's not typically the Instagram post because you would need a photo of what you're talking about. So that sort of engagement in a written way as a collecting approach is lost a little bit with Instagram. But, Instagram has positives because it's really exposed watches and vintage watches to a much wider audience than it had before. So there's always pros and cons.
What would you say are still some of the most or more active forums online still to this day?
The one that people go to, I guess, is Omega Forums, which has a bunch of different brands represented. Of course, Omega, Universal, Genève, things like that.
Right.
The problem is, I would say the culture there is not the best because most people hate dealers. I would say they're kind of notorious, and their pricing ideas are stuck severely in the past. So you basically have a lot of people that are kind of ornery and, I remember when a good pole router was $500 on eBay. Now they're, $3,000, that sort of attitude. There's other forums as well, obviously, but it's Vintage Rolex forum used to have a lot more engagement, but it kind of transitioned to Facebook, where a lot of people post little things. But the quality of those posts, like from an IQ perspective, is very low. It's like, oh, I'm thinking about getting a new date just. What do you think? And like, there's no real scholarship or engagement with those kind of posts. So, it's sad to see the death of forums for sure. And there was always issues like Watch Pro Site, the purists. That was really big when I got into this, a decade plus ago. Sorry. Yeah. That was a really big site when I got into this. But it had severe limitations because you weren't allowed to post a link to anything for sale or talk about price at all. So you've cut off the leg of a lot of discussions about the collecting aspect because you're just talking about the watch and maybe some basic details, not really condition. And it just became a way for a few people to show pretty photos of what they had in their collection. And there's no real engagement other than that's a great watch. Wow. That's pretty much all you were allowed to comment. And I think it's the same case today. So I like discussions where there's kind of no holds barred, but people are open to learning, and that's what you have to have.
For sure.
I was wondering, like, what was your first entry into vintage watches? What was the brand that got you into and going into yeah, the
Yeah, thankfully,
fantastic world of vintage watches?
yeah, it was. I'm my initial interest was really steel sports watches. That remains a key, obviously, interest for me. So whether it was things like, one of the first kind of nicer vintage watch I bought was a vintage Hoyer Carrera, which turned out to be a very early one. I didn't know that at the time, but kind of helped understand scholarship around that.
Right.
And then I got into Submariners, and I got a Bart Simpson gilt glossy sub, and then it kind of went down from there. I've always liked Hoyer. I like Rolex, of course.
Yeah.
That's probably the core of my business. But I love other brands: Jaeger LeCoultre, Enicar, obviously Patek Philippe, all these things. Cartier as well, as interest grows,
Yeah.
thanks to passionate people like Jacqueline sharing the love for Cartier.
Yeah.
But 5-10 years ago, those were not easy watches to sell like
Yeah.
they are. It was a very illiquid market.
Yeah. So what would you say, like, where do you see the vintage market going today?
I've for the whole time since the beginning really felt we're always on the verge of something more in terms of mainstream knowledge, in terms of values. I've always felt that these things were pretty grossly undervalued for what they are. Obviously, particularly good condition ones with good provenance. The reality is that multiple has grown so much between really excellent condition and mediocre condition. And you can kind of see that with, for instance, a small crown Submariner Rolex 5508. One with a service dial and all service parts might be $10,000. And Philips 2 years ago sold a perfect one, almost new old stock for 500,000. So you got a 50x change in value between mediocre and great. And I think that we're seeing that change in value happen in other references as people become more knowledgeable too. Back in the 1980s, talking to like a dealer like Peter Plains of Antiques Roadshow fame, the difference between new old stock, full set, like a 1518 versus one with a refinished dial was literally 10%. It was only 10% more for like new old stock, condition, box papers, everything. People didn't care about condition so much. It was just about owning the watch. But obviously there's a lot more knowledge, expertise, and people understanding what they're buying.
For sure.
Yeah, you bring the topic of provenance and condition being very key in vintage watches. But I also remember, watching a video, actually the interview with Ben Clymer and Waco, and Waco was interviewing Ben Clymer, and he was saying now he looks to buy from the original owner or the dealer who can prove that he got the watch from the original owner.
Yeah.
When you have somebody with such standing in the industry and supposedly high knowledge of vintage watches, basically saying it's a nightmare to navigate, I don't trust any other way except this way.
Yep.
Really, are we talking about something that is quite fluffy? That actually is your word because you have the credibility, but really what you're basing, not necessarily you yourself, but what these specialists are basing that knowledge on is actually quite fluffy.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of different thoughts about these things. It's not like we have blockchain technology for this watch was purchased here. Most watches you don't get a photo with the original owner. Many cases I buy watches from the original owner or their family, but they don't want their face out there. They don't want, a photo with me necessarily or any of this. I mean, because sometimes, for instance, one time I got an important watch, but the guy got it as part of an inheritance. There are a number of other, siblings that were in the inheritance kind of queue in the will, and he got this watch. Well, it turns out it's worth way more than anyone, anything else. And they didn't know that, but it turns out it's worth, 10 times what they thought it was worth, at least. So
What was it?
that was a GMT 6542. Yeah, so these are tough things. So there's different schools, of course. There's the school that says I think everyone ideally wants a watch that was born that way, that's not been altered, not put together, all those sorts of things. Obviously, there are many people who might have an incorrect watch and put it together. A dealer, say you have a watch with a service dial and you happen to find an original dial or something else. I don't love that, but it's still a fully correct watch, and there's no way anybody else knows about that issue because it looks fully correct, because all the parts are correct for that watch. There are, as I've told you, Jacqueline, like there's a lot of monkey business that goes on, and people can't just necessarily come into the hobby and think they can just trust anyone. I mean, I've just seen so many really bad stories of people getting financially hurt.
That actually leads perfectly into my next question, which I wanted to ask, which is what are some of these horror stories that you've heard of? Because when I was talking to you about buying the vintage watch online, right, you kind of said whoa, back up a little bit. It's not one of those watches you would just look up and buy online, because there's a lot of like you said, monkey business and funny things that's going on, like refinished cases and re-stamped hallmarks. So I was wondering, just off the top of your head, what are some of those horror stories that you've heard of?
I mean, I've seen people that bought millions. I mean, trying to think of a way to put it, but a person came, it's hard to, I've got to be careful what I say, I should say, but people that their husband bought a huge amount of vintage watches, and we're talking 8 figures, so more than $10 million. And then he passed away, and they bring the watches in for valuation, and they're worth a third of what the gentleman paid, because there's huge amounts of incorrect things, fake parts, etc. That's just, I've seen that example so many times, and people coming into the hobby that spend several $1 million and then learn that a bunch of their things are incorrect. Well, then they just are going to sell it all and then only buy modern watches because they feel more safe with that. No one wants to be made to feel that they're stupid. We all have a limited lifespan, and we don't need to do this. So if you're a captain of industry or master of your domain, whatever it is, and then you feel like you're an idiot, well, that's not going to exactly make you want to keep collecting watches or anything else. So people just basically say, I don't need this. So that's the problem. I think many dealers almost look for marks, if you will. Someone comes to them and has a lot of money to spend, and they're going to show you a good time, but then you're not going to be left with a lot after. So I just, there was someone else who was coming into the hobby recently who only wanted vintage Rolex with box and papers. And I joked with someone else that it's like having a sign on your back. Instead of it saying kick me, it says rip me off, because so many of the box and paper sets are kind of put together or stamped after, or that's not the criteria you look for first when you're buying a watch. You've got to look at the condition of the watch, then the provenance, and then it's a nice thing if it has box and paper is not the first thing you look for.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of leads on to, if you were going to go for a vintage watch, where would you go and source one? And is the auction house the the strongest level of provenance if you were trying to buy a watch?
It's not necessarily the strongest. I think obviously I enjoyed working at an auction house. I see a lot of bad watches pass through auction houses, as in watches that have been altered, have very distinct restoration that maybe the auction house is not aware of. Remember, the expertise at the auction houses, in my opinion, is not always the best, because they're constrained by compensation, etc. So there's a positive aspect to auction for sure. One being that it's public, the transparency around price. Two, there can be some community vetting, but it's not like there's a place where everyone goes and tells you their honest opinions of the watch, because who's writing all that online? I'm not. But I think that some people feel there's this false sense of security that if you buy a watch from a big auction house, you're safe. But many times the most sophisticated restoration that's undisclosed happens in watches that go through auction, I find. So again, if you just think, oh, I can go to this auction house and spend millions of dollars and I'll be okay, again, it's also the equivalent of having a sign on your back that says "Rip me off."
I actually have two things to say. So one is, I was just reading on this article written by Gary G, and he had basically said, even when you go into Antiquorum, there's a quote. I wouldn't call it a quote, but there's like a
disclaimer.
A disclaimer, a disclaimer that says that they're not liable once the sale is made, and if anything happens. And I was just like, and it's in such fine print. There's no way you could have found it on the site. But anyways, I'm curious about, within the auction house, who are the people that actually open up the watches and study the dial and all the different elements on the watch?
Yeah, so the auction houses basically have the low entry level position that does a lot of the work is the cataloger, or junior cataloger or junior specialist. They often know the least, but are doing the fundamental, like it has this many jewels, etc. It's obviously critical that those things be vetted by someone with more expertise, because they'll have no idea if the bridge has been re-engraved and is a fake bridge or other things. They're just doing a very basic cataloging. And there was a good talk by William Rohr at HSNY, Horological Society of New York, maybe 4 years ago. Have you watched it, Jacqueline?
I've watched yours.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah. But he talked about how you go back to the 1980s and 90s and you look at the auction catalogs and say you have a 1518, which was, the watch to have and the most valuable watches basically at that time. The description, there would be no description for the watch. And all you would have is a little paragraph of like 35 millimeters, whatever jewels, 17 jewels, and like, yellow gold and a few other things. And if you look at the watches now, obviously in the catalog, it might have 4 pages dedicated to it with 1,000 words written, incredibly detailed. Also in the old days, 1 photo of it from the front in low resolution. Now you've got 8 photos, including of the movement and all these things. So back in the day, it was kind of buy at your own risk. Now it's much more researched and more scholarship, which is a positive, but you still have to be very concerned, in my opinion, about things.
Well, I have to say, like, just this so past weekend, right, like with the auctions, I guess we can say it, like at Antiquorum, there was a lot there for a vintage Patek 130 chronograph, and with sector dial steel. And I was looking at it, and it it had only one photo, which was the watch in its service packaging. And I was like, oh, that's pretty nice, right? Like it came with the service packaging, so it was freshly serviced, and you saw the little paragraph, like the diameter and whatever. And then at the very, very, very end, it said, oh, watch came from important Italian collection. There has been only 2 spots on the dial that's been touched up. So when I saw that, I'm like, that's interesting, because the watch was in a packaging, you can't really see the dial clearly, because the packaging is no, it's not smooth. It has, ups and downs and
of course,
wrinkles and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
So then you click on it, and then I clicked on it and I zoomed in, and then I couldn't see any place that was touched up. I couldn't, until I was doing research about the 130, and I saw another lot from a previous Antiquorum auction with the same watch, this time not in the service packaging, because I guess it was before they sent it in for service, with a front shot and a side shot and everything. And then in that photo you can clearly see where the watch has been touched up, and it was done horribly in my opinion. But they didn't include it. Like they didn't include the old photos. They just it was one photo. So then I was curious to see what amount it went for afterwards, and I locked back in the next day, and it wasn't sold. So clearly people were doing their research, right? Like it wasn't sold. So that
it didn't sell either time.
It didn't. I don't think it's gonna sell the third time if they were to list it again. So that just tells you, maybe people were doing their research and due diligence. But can you imagine if like a newbie were to look for a steel 130 with sector dial, which usually goes for, I don't know, Eric, like $500,000 in good condition. And they find this in a recently serviced condition, and the estimate was like 120K. They'd be like, oh my gosh, like let me try my luck, and they'd be the only one bidding probably, and they would win it, and they think they hit the jackpot until you receive it, and then I don't know. So that's one interesting observation.
No, and definitely not. You typically do not want to be the only bidder on a watch. If you are, there's usually a problem. My favorite, most horrendous story is from a major auction house recently. Client of mine, before I was working with him, was basically bidding for one important watch, and the specialist, he didn't end up winning it. It went higher than he wanted to go. But he gave it a good run. And then he said, why don't you stay on for the next lot? And he's like, just see what happens, basically. And he tricked him into putting in the opening bid on the next lot, which was a very expensive watch, 6-figure watch. And then they're like, you want it.
Oh my God.
Like, what do you mean?
How do you feel?
And he had not looked at it at all. It was a horrible example, horrible condition, and he had to buy it. And
he bought it?
He did decide to pay for it. In hindsight, he shouldn't. He lost 6 figures on the watch as well.
Can I ask, say if something happens like that, are you obliged to pay for it? Like, or can you fight a little bit? He could have said, hey, I wasn't paying attention.
He got suckered into bidding, and the specialist knew it was going to pass, but they wanted a white glove sale. So he pushed him into throwing in the opening bid at a price. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars more than it should have been for, and just a crap watch. And it's a horrible thing. Technically, you sign a contract that you will be buying something. If you if you agree to buy it, and they'll send you threatening letters that they'll come after you if you won't pay for it. But from my understanding and experience, they've never successfully forced someone to pay for something if they didn't want to. Their only recourse as an auction house is to ban you from bidding again,
Right.
which happens obviously.
Right.
I've got a question for Eric, which is, Jacqueline and I were kind of, when the auctions happen, I'm messaging her about what's happening. And I don't know if it's something you can answer or something you would know, whether when you're bidding and the price is going up, are there artificial bidders that are trying to put the price up with no real intention to actually own the piece?
Yeah.
Can I say something? Dan, were you not there in Hong Kong when this happened? You were in Hong Kong when I think I told you this. Okay, but I'll tell you after Eric answers the question.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm interested, Long Long. You have to say.
Yeah, I'm just
I wanna
like
hear your
shocked.
story.
No, you go
Okay,
first,
should I-
Eric. Go
You
first,
go.
Eric.
Yeah, you
go
go
first.
You go
Yeah.
first.
Okay, there's two things. First, there are chandelier bids, which are legal, where you can bid up to the reserve amount. The auctioneer can say 5,000, 10,000. He's just pointing at people. Then it's not a real bid, and say the opening bid is 50,000. They'll go right up to like 48,000, and they'll make a good show of it. And for someone that's new, they'll think, oh wow, there's a lot of activity, but there's no real bid until 50, so they'll put it right up to 48. So the first bid's 50, and that's the reality. There are also times that you could bid under the reserve and potentially get the watch. So if the opening bid is 50, in many cases you could, and that's what they've agreed with the seller, that's the minimum, otherwise the watch will be returned to them. Sometimes you could bid 48 and win it, and Christie's would, take that margin or whatever. They're still making more money at a 25% margin. It would go for 60,000.
Right.
But they could take a small loss there. On the Christie's balance sheet, at least when I was there, they actually show you losing money on the watch if you do that, which is stupid in my opinion, because you're making $10,000. You're not losing $2,000, but they're like, they'll book it as a loss, which I hate. They can actually, this is all the funny insider stuff, but they'll rack up as an auctioneer how many losses you're taking, because you have to balance you want to try to get as close to a white glove sale as possible, which is 100% sold.
Right.
But they'll mark you as losses, and theoretically they could come in during the auction and pull you, like pulling the quarterback from a football team and say, get off the field. You're racking up too many losses, even though you're actually making money for the auction house by selling it. But so there's the chandelier bids, but then there are certainly rumors of bids that are either done by the auction house to push someone up, particularly if it's a written bid, to push them up toward their maximum, or people in the room bidding on their own watch, trying to bid that up. Unfortunately,
Jacqueline and I were laughing at that because there was a Hodinkee, I can't remember which one it was, a Hodinkee watch. Can you remember which one it was, Jacqueline? The Hodinkee one.
Oh, the MBNF. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
no.
the
Was it the MBNF or the Hoyer?
it was one of the Hodinkee watches, right?
Yeah,
and there were only two bidders for
two bidders, and one was in New York.
Yeah, one was in New York.
So...
we were like, that's Ben Clymer. Straight up there, right?
Yeah.
He didn't win the watch, but the watch got up to significantly above like premium. Yeah, and then it was so almost telegraphed, because as soon as it came from New York, there weren't any real bids coming from New York on the auction night, and it was like the only one. And then we were like, that's Ben Clymer. And then it got to a certain point, you could almost calculate it, and the guy stopped bidding, and the guy and another guy won it, and I think it went to the Middle East or something.
It's crazy. Yeah, so
we forget that it's just like it's like a good show, right? I've personally never been to an auction, but then I've seen like reviews when people post like a video on YouTube, and then the comments will be like, oh, that was a good show, that was really entertaining. So yes, it's transactional, but also it's like a source of entertainment.
It is quite entertaining. If you go with your friends, it is quite, and you got food, it's good.
Yeah.
What did you want to say, Long?
Okay. I've also realized, by the way, when you go onto the auction sites and then they show past results, the past results, the actual figure is like with the commission. So they calculate the commission. So it looks great. Like every lot did well and so on. But in the most recent Geneva Philips sale, my friend wanted a 3,700 and he said, hey, I'm going to put in the bid at this price. And I was like, you're not going to get it. And as we're like chatting as he's bidding, right? I'm like, you're not going to get it, because I told him what the standard price was. And then he's like, shit, I got it. And I was like, there's no way. Why is it so low? Because it
was really low.
Hammered
like
at
90,
it was
like
90,000.
Yeah, it was really
It was
low.
90,000. And then a week later, I was like, I still can't believe you got it for 90,000, you know? And he's like, oh yeah, I just found out like they replaced a dial. It was a service dial. And I was like, wait, how do you not know this? Like,
was it in the catalog?
No. But then he said, to be fair, right? He never asked any questions and I asked him why. And he said, well, it's Philips. So I was like, okay.
So did
it's like our mutual friend Chester, when he went and got the crash.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't know what he was buying, and then he did the research afterwards. Like,
we had to send him the YouTube clip because he wouldn't even read about it. So we had to find this Christian, right? His YouTube clip and send it to Chester. Okay, so my story. Like, I know a lot of it's manipulated, but I just hate to believe it. Like, I want to buy into the whole like story with like it is real and everything, right? Because I remember my first auction in Hong Kong, I would see these, they're not thugs, but you know, like very local Hong Kong guys, and they'll be sitting in the back and I can hear them, they're holding onto the phone. And I know it's not the actual guy who's bidding. He's like bidding for his boss or for someone else. So I'll be like, okay, obviously there's a fund and so on, so on. And then it was very obvious, it's like FPJs, like there are people funding this. And then I have been approached by a lot of people to say, do you want to set up a fund? And then we do this. But in Hong Kong, so this is why I'm asking you, Dan. In Hong Kong recently, before I came back, I was dropping someone. I can say this because he's not there anymore. He works for Philips, but he doesn't work there anymore. And then I was dropping him off, and then he had to take a call for the auction that was happening that night. And they were basically discussing which fake bids he had to put in. And then suddenly it was silent. And then I think the guy on the other end was like, whose car are you in? And then that guy casually was like, I'm in Long's car, like Long's car. But you know, no matter what, I'm still a potential customer, right? Or customer. You can't say this shit in front of me, right?
Yeah.
So he got off the phone and he's like, this does not leave the car. And I was like, yeah, okay. I don't know if I can buy from auction again. It's so bad.
Yeah.
But it was literally like, what bid are you going to put it in? At what price? How many times are you going to do it? And like Eric said, it's like, you already know your client really well. So you know what price he's going to put. So you just got to like push him a little bit. So you just squeeze in a little bit there.
It's not something I would do, but it definitely happens. And some people don't care, you know, honestly, they're bored and they have a lot of money. But if you care about what you're paying, you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
But even in the most recent one, the thing with the telephone line, the World Time, in the Geneva auction for Philips, I was like, come on, there's nothing wrong with the phone line. There's no way in 2021 your phone doesn't even work.
And it happened on like, that one lot, right? It only happened on that one lot. So I wasn't watching it. I actually heard it from Dan, and you guys were watching it. So
I was laughing
when I woke up, I saw the group chat. I was like, oh, what went down? Like, I thought the World Time sold for a lot, right? But then Dan was like, oh yeah, like there was something wrong with the phone line, and I was like, okay, did it happen on one lot, that single lot? And it was like, okay. I was like, okay, interesting.
Well, I was 100% not convinced.
A lot of people speculate, I don't know if it's true, obviously, but that there was something like $10 million guarantee on the watch. if that was the case, they lost $2 million.
Yeah.
The other is whether it's just a good show to make the consignor, to have an excuse for the consignor why it didn't go higher. Because people came out in the early days after it was announced, they were saying, this is 11 to 12 million and all this. So, you know, a lot of it is a show, particularly if the consignor has more watches to give to Phillips. They really want him. They will perform well on the rest of them. Because if he was seeing these kind of numbers or had that idea in his head, particularly that it should go more than the blue cloisonne that Christies sold in Hong Kong for, what was it, 8.9 million. So if he thinks, man, this sold for, you know, over $1 million less, like this is crazy, that's an issue.
Yeah, for sure. But on the subject of auction houses, I was wondering, like, Eric, if you could tell us during your time at Christie's, like, was there a particular watch that just kind of like blew your mind away, or left like a really strong, significant impression on you? Be it the watch itself or the consignor story, or
Yeah, I mean, a couple did. One was just a watch that was kind of awesome in the every sense of the word, was the Audemars Piguet 5516 perpetual calendar, which came out of Florida from the nephew of the original owner in the original box, was basically kind of found in the estate. And it was essentially new old stock condition. And that watch has incredibly aggressive enamel. There's only 9 of those watches that were made, 3 in the first series, 6 in the second series. They were the first wristwatches with a leap year indicator on the dial. And for me, the Christie's one we had found was far and away the best condition of any of them. Now AP they have all 3 of the first series, and I think they have 3 or 4 of the second series, and there's only 2 in private hands, and there's 1 missing. So that watch just is insanely beautiful. I'm not even really a yellow gold guy, but that watch is, to me, probably the most beautiful wristwatch ever.
The dial is enamel?
The all the text is. So it's Champ-Levé enamel, but very aggressive. So it's all carved out by hand. Each one of the dials is unique because they're all done a little different, and then filled in, and just incredible on the wrist, just beautiful. So a gentleman bought it when we sold it. I was encouraging people to bid. This was 2015, December 2015. It went for something like 545,000. And then I think that watch is probably a $2 million watch today. There was another one that then sold at Phillips in 2017. That was a new discovery. And that one went for 900,000. And I've heard it's on the market for 2 million. And the condition was not nearly as good as the Christie's one. And all the rest are in the AP museum. They're not going anywhere. So it's just a really special watch. Another watch that was pretty dramatic and incredible was the Haile Selassie Patek Philippe 2497 with black dial, kind of military style with radium. That watch actually came from a lady in Africa who had it. It was her father's watch and a gift from Haile Selassie. It was kind of raw condition, it was pretty worn, but unpolished, never serviced since leaving Patek Philippe. It was just an incredible find. And the history associated with it and the engraving on the back was incredible. But even more so was the drama around its sale. It was coming up at Christie's Geneva in November 2015, and middle of the auction, they take a break for lunch, around 12 noon. My boss is John Reardon, and he basically had tears in his eyes and told me that the watch and our business manager had been basically arrested and taken in for questioning with the watch, which was a huge percentage of the sale because we knew it was a 7-figure watch. It was a big portion of the sale. And basically the Selassie family, a few days before the auction, had two different people had filed an ownership dispute right at the last minute with the canton of Geneva, of the Swiss government. So it basically was so dramatic. It turned out our business manager wasn't really taken off in handcuffs, but in the situation, information's moving quickly, and it's a very stressful thing, and there's a lot of watches coming up where my eyes about fall out of my head, and we're like, this is really bad. This is the watch that's on the front cover of the catalog by itself, and everyone wants this watch. It's maybe the watch of the auction season in Geneva. So we're like, what's our auctioneer Thomas Perazzi going to do when this comes up? Because everyone starts coming into the room. You've got 100 plus people in the hotel room.
So by then, Tom already knew what was happening.
We knew before, the second session, but we weren't communicating it for whatever reason. It was more just going to happen in the moment. So the lot's coming up, say, I don't know what lot it was, 213. We've got people on the phone ready to bid. And then Thomas goes lot 212 sold for 50,000. Lot 213 has been withdrawn. Lot 214. And then there's everyone in the room is just stunned. What? And then suddenly there's dead silence. And then suddenly there's a roar of talking, what is going on? People talking to each other. And then Davide Parmigiani is there ready to bid. And he starts yelling, basically, Thomas, we need an explanation. There's 150 people at least in this room, which is pretty packed. And everyone's like, what is going on? And then whatever the next lot was, a couple dealers were looking for an opportunity to bid on it, hoping they would get the watch and all the chaos. It was hilarious to watch. I'm on the phone with people. They're like, what's going on? Why is it withdrawn? Everyone's going crazy. And it basically took a year and a half until it could come up for auction again. It was a whole involved proceeding with the government or the canton of Geneva, and finally was allowed to come up for auction in May 2017 at Geneva. But obviously we were not going to bring the watch on tour anywhere else in the world, because it was at risk of going through the same ownership issues. If it came to the US, they would have filed the similar issue. So it just stayed in Geneva and then sold there. But it's tough. Because there was so much emotion imbued with that. The family members that filed dispute, as far as I know, didn't really have any proof other than that it had his kind of very special personal crest on the back. And their case was that he never would have given it away. Our case had more involved kind of evidence that it was given, and they didn't really have anything to prove. But these were grandchildren. Their grandfather was basically smothered by a pillow by communists. He had something like 19 palaces worth billions of dollars today. And they all had to flee with nothing. And we're talking about people that are school teachers now in public schools and other things. So, of course, there's some bitterness about what transpired, and they're trying to get anything they can get back in terms of wealth. But it's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a story.
Yeah.
Just watching, like, because I've watched Davide Parmigiani, and he's a big guy, right? Like loud voice and everything. And you said he was like yelling, and the whole room was like chaos.
Like, we
And
need
so it
an
went from
explanation.
silence to chaos, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was. I don't think I'll ever see something like that again in my life. Being on that side as well, like with a phone glued to my ear, forbidding on the side. It's just a surreal experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, if people are looking for vintage watches, I'm not sure you answered. Where should they go? And we've talked about all the many pitfalls, pitfalls, sorry, and the dangers of getting into vintage watches, even with the high level auction house. Where would you advise people to go?
Well,
like, aside from yourself, obviously,
because I would say call me, but there are definitely. It just depends what you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to what is your budget? Are you trying to buy, 2499s and 1518s? Are you trying to buy a 1980s Submariner? Obviously, different people focus on different things, and I think the process should be, disciplined. You can't just salesmen, I've found, like to be sold. So you don't want like a salesman type guy selling you stuff. You want to have data about why this justifies the price. Where has this watch been, over the last decades? All these sorts of things. Does it look similar to other watches with close serial numbers? All that process. So no matter who you're working with, they should have some experience, hopefully, handling what you're looking for. And, different people have different expertise, no question.
How would you say the current market is split up between vintage and modern?
I mean, modern is by far and away the massive market that's like, of the pre-owned watch market, that's got to be 90% plus. Everyone that's interested in 5711s and 5990s, which I guess are trading, at 300 plus now, secondhand, and everyone wants these. The Richard Mille phenomenon, that market makes vintage watches look so small. And talking to a friend of mine, Ryan Chong, who's helps lead the watch private sales at Sotheby's. We worked together at Christies. He worked under me, but he's seeing so many people come to Sotheby's every day wanting to buy a 5711 or a 15202 or whatever, and they'll buy it, or 5970s or all modern things. He's like, no one comes to us asking for vintage. They're just coming to us to buy a new Aquanaut, 5164 and all this stuff, and they can help them. I think that revenue's probably gone through the roof for them since he's kind of focused on helping close those transactions and capitalize on them, use their name. But yeah, I mean, it's if for instance right now you wanted to buy a good white dial Paul Newman, really mint one, there are none around. So you would need, even this last auction season, I didn't see any good ones in Geneva. So you would really need someone who can almost pull something from someone's collection and make them an offer they can't refuse, because good stuff is just not on the market. And
People
I think and you'd say that probably with Cartier stuff as well. Like, it's not like there's tons of great examples out there on Front 24. Anything that's there is either at an absolutely absurd price where everyone's not doing it, or it's gone already. So that's the issue. I just tell people, like I had told you can't just like go online and expect to buy a great watch, and expect just to be sitting there available for sale, because it's probably, there might be a serious issue
with it.
there.
Long.
I'm wondering, when you worked at Christie's, right? Selling a watch it doesn't seem to be hard because you kind of go through your phone book and people you know, and you're like, are you interested, right? But how do you ask people, do you want to sell your watch without sounding insulting, you know?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's, yeah, I think it's a good question. I just approach people and say, this market's doing really well right now in case you're interested in consigning it. There's no pressure. But, if you are interested, let me know because I think it'd do really well.
Okay.
People don't want to consign into a market that's not doing well typically, but they'll come find you in many cases if they actually are motivated to sell. But then you do have to be proactive and be like, that Paul Newman you bought for 200,000 3 years ago, I think it would sell for more than 300,000 today if you're interested in selling it, sort of thing. It's the same thing I do as a dealer because I've sold, coming up on 4 years here, watches from 4 years ago. I'm like, can I pay you 30% more than you paid for this? Because the market's moved up a lot.
Right. Yeah.
People are, even if they say no, they're happy to know that that's gone up a lot and they have a nice offer.
But also, I think it helps your business when, say, you are very proactive and helping your clients out, and they know that they can trust on you, and the watches that they've sourced from you have gone up tremendously, so that when they do want to sell, like they'll at least approach you first, right? So
exactly.
It's a cyclical, mutual beneficial relationship. So I guess we'll wrap up the interview with one last question, and that is we kind of did a deep dive in vintage today, which is the goal when Eric and I were talking about this podcast, because both Eric and I are very passionate about vintage. I really got into vintage even before the modern stuff because there was just something about it that attracted me to it. But between the four of us, it's actually a pretty even split, because while Eric and I are big on vintage, Dan and Lung are not as big. But Lung is recently dipping her toes in vintage. So the last question I want to ask Eric is, what would you say about the allure of vintage watches that attracts people to them, and why do you think and why do you prefer vintage more than modern?
I like the story. I like the patina, the idea that these watches were really built for a purpose. I like datagraphs a lot. I know Long has an awesome one, but no one was
Long
buying.
and Dan both have datagraphs.
Yeah, and they're awesome watches, but it's not like you're buying any of those do not have a great story other than it was on some rich guy's wrist, when he was trading stocks. It's not like, oh yeah, he was a fighter pilot and he wanted a datograph because it was the best watch at the time, and he was, this sort of thing, or he was an airline. There's no great stories with modern watches, really. And also modern watches, because they seem relatively common, because they've all been bought to keep, for investment, that sort of thing. So, there are some that are much rarer than others, obviously, but there's none of these things that are going into landfills or things like that. Whereas old watches get thrown away all the time. That could be very valuable. So it's the equivalent for me of collecting, I'm not into this, so don't spend my money on this, but 1950s, Topps baseball cards are so much rarer and more special than 1990s things when everyone was already kind of investing. No one's throwing their baseball cards away like they were in the 1950s. People weren't putting them in the spokes of their bicycle to make a noise, like they were in the 50s. So it's just a different collecting thing. And I think each vintage watch is kind of unique just with how it's aged or made, but modern is exactly the same because of the automation, computers. They're almost all the same. And I don't want to wear a watch where I feel like I'm degrading its value by just wearing it out and about. which is kind of the beauty of a vintage Rolex, for instance, that already has some scratches on it. You're not affecting the value $1, but if you have a new Journe and you get scratches on it, you are affecting the value for sure. So it's you can't wear that as a beater watch.
Yeah.
So it's just a different approach.
Yeah. And I guess like one last question, this just came into my mind. You said old watches get recycled and thrown out all the time. What do you think are the chances that some great watches were thrown out, like just accidentally or?
Oh, very high, because extremely high. I mean, because I talk to people that sometimes watches are saved just because almost by happenstance. I bought a 6536/1 Submariner last year, and the guy had worked for JFK. I had posted a photo, like the watch was like 1 foot away from JFK in an important meeting, and the kids found the watch and they literally were about to throw it away, and they said, well, I guess it is a Rolex, even though it's kind of like old looking, etc. So they're like, maybe we should look into if this is worth anything. They were literally going to throw it away. So I'm sure it's happened a lot. I've seen things get saved, thankfully, just miraculously at yard sales for $3 and things like that, where you would think it would get thrown away. All kinds of crazy watches.
Yeah. So
did you guys do you remember 2 years ago there was a story in the US? This woman bought a couch for $25.
Yeah.
And then she dug under the couch, and it was a pawn human.
It
I was just like, how lucky do you have to be?
Like,
Great.
Yeah, I saw that. And then there was another one, a famous I think vintage sub that was bought at like a police sale, and people thought it was fake, and the lady posted it on the forum, and everyone just kept on saying it's fake, you bought it for like $70 or something. And then Andrew Shear like actually went ahead and checked out the watch, and it was like a really good example. I forget the reference.
It's a Mark 0 1665 double red Sea Dweller.
Oh, Sea Dweller. Okay.
Well, it said the Mariner on the dial as well, which is why you say that. But yeah, Morgan King has that now.
Yeah, I watched his interview and he told the story, and I was like, how does that even happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the deep sea alarm LeCoultre that was at Goodwill in Arizona for $5.99. That was the story I wrote about on Hodinkee, and obviously the guy sold it for $35,000, but you would imagine that watch was very close to being thrown away at one point and was just given to a Goodwill.
So the moral of the story is, once the world opens up, go visit all the yard sales and garage sales.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Like buy cheap sofas.
Yeah,
like,
buy a bag of $2 watches. You might never know what you find. This is what I want to do. Like when I can go to Europe, I just want to go to those like really rural towns and see if they have old tanks. Like like I bet there are some out there just waiting to be found. So okay, so to wrap it up, Eric, we have a quick fire round. So I prepared 10 quick questions for you to kind of just zoom through. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so favorite must-go joint in Palm Beach?
Honor Bar.
Honor Bar, what is it?
It has the best burger in town, in my opinion, but just a great bar or restaurant place. It's good.
Okay. Second question, biggest watch pet peeve?
Birth year watches.
You're not a fan?
I hate birth year watches. I
decided, but a mutual friend, Jeff, you'll hurt his feelings. He found a birth date watch.
I know. That's great. Yeah, it's a great watch, thankfully, regardless of that. But but in general, no. I the reason I don't like it is one, I used to get emailed almost daily. Can you help me find a birth year sub?
Watch.
Find a birth year guarantee. And one, it's very hard to define what's a birth year watch. Is it when the case is made? Is it when it was tested? When it was sold? No one knows. It's obviously just subjective and a matter of opinion with most watches. When they were sold, it's not like they're dated like cars are.
Yeah.
And we're just kind of guessing, and then it feels like people are checking a box. Like, I'm interested in working with people that want to be collectors and get great watches. They're just happy to have a birth year sub and wear it the rest of their life, and they're not going to buy another vintage watch. That's it.
Right.
So I don't like that whole approach.
Okay. Oh, is there an echo?
No, it's okay now.
Okay. What would you say is the one watch that got away for you?
I don't know about got away, I guess, but I had gotten a Skipper era, Hoyer Skipper Carrera, basically pretty inexpensively, I found online. And then I ended up, when I was at Oxford, it was a little bit polished, more polished than I would have liked. So I sold it, even though I loved the dial and just loved the watch. I sold it for $9,000 just to help, keep funds flowing while I was in Oxford. And then, 2 or 3 years later, it's an $80,000 watch. And I was like, man, why did I do that? But, that was kind of my first experience in a big way of something like that happening. But it happens. It's just life.
Yeah. Okay. So what would you be most likely doing if you never stumbled into watches? Would it still be politics or?
Maybe politics. Yeah. Politics or business. Yep.
Okay. And what watch would you think you'd be wearing then at your job?
I still love the Submariner. It's kind of the first watch I was interested in a big way. First, like, named model watch I had heard of. So I've always loved that watch.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so in the last episode when we were recording, I was personally asked the question, what's one vintage watch / reference or brand that is very undervalued and still hidden from plain sight? I'd set some watches, and these two made really like a lot of fun out of me, because they thought, oh, all the watches you mentioned are already pretty hyped up. So I was like, oh, why not take this time to ask you the same question? What do you think is like one vintage reference or brand or, whatever that you think is massively undervalued or people should be checking out?
Yeah, I think I'll say a few if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yes, please. It's like, write this down right now.
I like Vulcane crickets in particular.
Yes. Okay. You are a big cricket man.
Yeah.
I am. I love them. They're just excellent watches. Very inexpensive for what they are. It's basically, the alarm is really kind of a cool, distinct complication. So alarm watches in general, I think, are undervalued. Enicar, I like a lot. Enicar. People are getting more interested in those, but very funky. I love the Saturn logo on the dial. Very distinctive kind of bevels on the lugs. They made great chronographs, divers, even dress watches. And I like Certina as well, like the Certina Argonaut models. The Argonaut 280 are very inexpensive, very cool, often with really cool dials, blue, red, silver, metallic blue, all different really neat dials in a neat shape.
And Dunhill, you've recently had a really neat Dunhill.
Those are not common, so it's not like I can say go buy Dunhill, because they're just not around.
So
I love those watches, and they're just very, very rare. Zenith has kind of taken off, but they've, everyone focuses on the El Primero models, but they made a ton of other fantastic models. Universal Genève as well. Of course, some people focus on the big stuff, but they made so many beautiful chronographs
that's what I said, and those two made fun of me. I said, the really
I think made fun is a very misleading term. No, because I wasn't making fun. I was just highlighting the point that I don't think that Universal Genève was like the brands that Eric said. You know, when he said Enicar, the other brands, I was like, okay, yeah, really? I don't really see anybody collecting those. But when you say Universal Genève, I think loads of people collect those pieces.
That's true. True. I really like their prototype chronograph dial with the really
that's incredible.
It's beautiful white and gray. So rare.
Yeah.
Okay, last few questions. You've been given one opportunity to travel back in time to buy one watch. What watch would you buy, and what one watch would you wear and take on the journey?
The one he sold for 9K. The one he sold for 9K.
Yeah. No, I mean, if I could go back and buy a steel 1518 and I love steel watches, so that's kind of the grail. Obviously, they never did a steel 2499 or anything like that, but that would be a grail for sure.
Do you believe in what Alfredo said, that they did a steel and pink gold, or like they made the cases?
Yeah, apparently they did, and I thought that might be King Michael of Romania's watch. So I had written the palace about that, and they said he did have one. We had a black and white photo of him wearing it, and I thought it might be steel and pink, but you can't tell because it's black and white. It turned out it's just pink, probably. But it caused somewhat of a kerfuffle because the Romanian press covered that he had this watch after I was like linked to it in a story on Hodinkee. And they asked me for comment, and I said, yeah, the palace confirmed that he had this watch, but the palace was then trying to deny it. And I basically shared the email with the Romanian press or whatever. And it was like front page story in Romania about his $1 million watch, maybe. So it was just kind of funny, but I'm not sure. He passed away a few years ago. It's probably his daughter inherited it, and it's not clear the condition. Probably pretty polished based on newer photos I saw toward the end of his life.
Right.
But still,
it must be very interesting to work at Patek Philippe, knowing all these people are talking that these pieces still exist. You know that they think there's only 2. Nah, there's 7. You know, like because they're the one that know, and they'd be like thinking, I can't wait for. I know where this piece is or who we sold it to, maybe.
If they care, that's the issue. They probably don't care about that.
Yeah, they probably don't care, but. It would be interesting. If I was working there, I would certainly be looking at these models going, okay, there's a few, there's a lot more than people say there are, or that didn't exist.
Exactly. Exactly. For sure.
Okay, so second last question. You are a golfer. You golf a lot, and so is your very talented 7-year-old son Charlie, who seems to be following your footsteps. And the question is, has he picked up anything other than golf? Like, has he picked up the watch bug at all from you?
Oh yeah, he's actually gotten really into watches the last few months, which is cool. We have a few little things like this Rolex pocket watch from the 1930s that it's got a sector dial, and he just absolutely loves this thing, which is cute.
He likes the sector dial off the bat.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. So anytime it's like basically sitting on my desk in a on a little stand, and he like anytime we have friends over, he goes, picks it up and shows them and is like, isn't this the best Rolex ever? And like, isn't this the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? It's so cute.
Yeah, he likes the best stuff.
That's his standard kind of thing. And then it completely didn't even know that like the Submariner is one of my favorite watches. And he told me
he likes it.
He was looking through the coolest watches ever, an article online, and then the Submariner was in there. He's like, that's my favorite watch. I'm like, that's so crazy, because that was the one I liked most first.
Yeah.
It was just hilarious to, I couldn't believe it. I was just shocked.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I knew that feeling, but obviously like when your kid picks up after you and starts liking the same thing that you do, like that must
it's cool. Yeah, it's a total different
Yeah.
feeling for sure.
For sure. And last but not least, I wanted to ask, like, how's baby Gemma doing? Because you've recently welcomed a another baby girl into your household.
Yeah, she's doing well. It's I think about 20 days. I guess she's 21 days old now or something. But yeah, she's doing great. She is getting bigger and just such a sweet girl, very smart already. Funnily, you can just tell personality a little bit.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
she's like, don't let me be bored. Like I cannot be bored. So she wants to be walking around and seeing
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
changing environment.
I just think about, all the babies who are born during COVID, like they have no idea what's happening. And when they
Yeah.
grow up, you would be telling them, actually, when you were born, like the world was experiencing the first ever, like, I don't want to say
First in
catastrophe,
a
but like
century.
event. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they would know nothing about it, because by the time that they grow up, it would be already, just
Yeah.
something they read about.
I know,
So
it's crazy. It's
yeah,
crazy.
it is crazy. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That was the last question of our quick fire. I think we can all say that we really enjoyed talking with you. I know I certainly did, because like we talked a lot about, topics that I'm deeply passionate about. So to those who are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. It was a little bit longer of an episode, but I hope that you enjoyed listening. And make sure to check out Eric at his Instagram, and follow us at the Waiting List Podcast. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. It was
Thanks.
awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List Podcast. Hit the subscribe button, and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List Podcast.